for joining. We're never quite sure how many we'll get to these sessions, but I always work on the assumption that the right people are here at the right time. So just in terms of a bit of info about me. So I'm Sarah Stephenson-Hunter. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of the co-founders and directors of Simply Equality. And we seek to break down barriers for disabled and LGBTQ+ people. There's myself and another director, PK, who sometimes is at this sessions, but they can't be here. The session today is about intersectionality, which I know can be a bit of a buzzword. But we're going to talk about that in terms of, the world of inclusion and how to make workplaces more inclusive. But before we start, I'll just do a little bit of a visual description because we believe in doing these. So if you haven't picked up already, so I am totally blind. I love when I use some technology to sort of tell me what I'm wearing and stuff. And it says, picture of a woman with long brown hair, looking relaxed or asleep. I can assure you I'm not asleep, even though my eyes are closed. But yeah, I do have long, reddy brown hair. I'm wearing a headset. I have a corally jumper on. And yes, I do have a bit of a bruised eye and with some steri strips. That's the joys of being blind and moving to a new city. I did have a close encounter with a lamppost, but I'm fine. I'm fine. It looks worse than it is. But that's me. If we move to the next slide, just a little bit of housekeeping that we like to do in all our sessions. Feel free to move, stim, self-regulate. I mean, obviously this is online, so Joe, Damien, whoever else, just do what you need to do to be comfortable. These sessions are meant to be relaxed and quite informal. And we say this in whether it's an online workshop or whether it's a physical workshop, do what you need to do to feel comfortable. Also, this is a safe space. We want to create a learning environment. Although obviously I'm presenting, and obviously I have experience and expertise in this area, we're here to learn from each other, and we should always be learning from each other, so that there should be a sense of safety. Calling in versus calling out. The example we give here is, let's see at a family event, and you've all got an uncle. We call him Uncle Steve. And Uncle Steve is that family member that you just know at a family event is going to say something that's just not good. It's going to be embarrassing and awkward. And in those situations, it'd be very easy to sort of jump on Uncle Steve and say, oh, you can't say that, you can't do that. And that's fine. We don't want to tolerate discrimination, bigotry, but we believe in calling in, so calling people into the discussion. So, maybe there are things in this discussion today that things that are said or things that it brings up that, we're not too comfortable with. We prefer to call in and not call out, because that's how we learn, that's how we engage. And I'd hope that we would all, myself included, be willing to be able to learn and respect somebody who's told us if we said something inappropriate. Finally, questions are welcome. Obviously, we're using Zoom. I know Zoom has the hand function, but I am using assistive text. So if I don't get to your question or comment immediately, there'll be a reason why. And I've got my colleague Emmanuel in the background who will tell me if I miss anything. So that's all the sort of preamble out the way. If we can move on to the next slide, bear with me, bit of a tech hiccup my side, that's better. So why does intersectionality matter? As I said earlier, it's a bit of a buzzword. Those of us that work in the EDI space will have heard a lot said about intersectionality. And we can be guilty sometimes as EDI practitioners to just, pick on the latest trends or buzzwords. But intersectionality really does matter. Why does it matter? It matters because every single one of us has multiple identities. So as I introduced earlier, I am Sarah. I'm totally blind. So obviously that's my identity as a disabled person. I'm also an openly out trans woman. So obviously, that's another part of my identity that shapes how I experience the world. I'm also white, which, that impacts how I experience and interact with the world, the experiences I have with the world. And I'm from a certain part of the UK. So those are all things that go together to make me, me. And every single one of you on this call, every single one of your colleagues, in fact, every single person is made up of multiple identities. And it's not a case of 1 + 1 = 2. In my case, disability plus transness equals 2. The maths can be much more nuanced and complicated by that. I often say that how my overlap and identity shape my experience very much depends on the context. On an everyday basis, I would say it's my blindness that's the biggest challenge in terms of, accessing material, systems, policies, getting out and about. But obviously, as a trans person, particularly in the UK, in the current political context, that does have an impact. So obviously, these intersecting identities do impact all of us. And, should go without saying, but the goal of the work that I'm doing, all of us in this space are doing, is to create inclusive workplaces where they take account of these intersecting identities and where that benefits everybody, not just people from those particular minority groups, but every single aspect. So that's a little bit about why this matters. Next, what is intersectionality? Now, we could spend a lot of time on this, but these sessions are intended to be, not quite an introduction, but keep a light touch as part of the discussion, some free information. So just in terms of a basic definition, intersectionality was coined by a sociologist, Kimberly Crenshaw, in the 1990s in America. It was originally a legal concept to explain how Black women were disadvantaged by treating race discrimination different to gender discrimination. She actually developed it based on the experience of seeing the way that young Black girls were treated in school and how they had different outcomes and different experiences. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about, that was the context that it was developed in, and can it be extended further, or is it just there to talk about those particular aspects? But I do believe it's a useful concept that can apply to all aspects of ADI work when we're coming to look at different identities and different challenges that are faced. In the UK, I would say that the siloing of protected characteristics is an issue and actually doesn't take account of intersectionality. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm old enough to remember when we had the Disability Discrimination Act, the Gender Equality Act, and I understand the Race Relations Act. I understand why it was all brought together in the Equality Act in 2010. And, think what you may of that legislation. It's our key piece of legislation, but obviously it very much breaks things down into the 9 specific protected characteristics. And those of us that work in the EDI space, would say, well, what it doesn't take account of is things like social mobility or class or educational background. So I do think we have a bit of an issue with siloing of certain aspects of equality in the UK, but probably not just the UK. I often use the example that I have had problems with my vision, my health from gosh, early childhood. I had cataract surgery age 7. So I've lived my life as someone with a disability, with a visual impairment, and I foolishly thought, that okay, so I've lived my life as a disabled person. So I've had that experience. I've lived and worked and lived my life in that context. But when I came out as trans I came out in 2013. Obviously, I've been trans all my life, but I didn't understand what that meant or what my experience was all about. When I came out as trans, I thought, well, I've lived as a disabled person. I obviously understand those issues of discrimination and prejudice. And yes, I think it's fair that those of us from different minority groups can understand some of the basic principles, but our experiences are different. And even if you get groups of disabled people together, groups of trans people together, you know, groups of autistic people together, we might well have shared experiences, but there are still differences even from within the same group. And so I would say that the Equality Act, whilst it's what we have, there are some challenges and flaws to that. But that's why intersectionality is important, because it also talks about the ways in which our identities combine and how that creates different barriers. You got the slide there, the experience of a white disabled woman would be different to that of a black disabled woman. So that's sort of very basic, and I know we could probably have spent a lot more time on defining what intersectionality is. But in essence, it's a lens. I've heard Kimberly Crenshaw herself describe it as a prism through which we look at the experiences of people from minority groups. It's important not just as a sociological concept, but also a tool to enable structural change, showing that systems are intertwined, i.e. ableism connects to racism, connects to sexism, to homophobia, etc., etc., etc. So it is all interconnected. Basically, if you're not, from what gets classed as the sort of so-called standard, the norm in society, whatever that is, then we have these different aspects of oppression. And it's not about the oppression Olympics. It's not about, I'm more disadvantaged because I'm trans than because I'm disabled. But it's about how it all comes together. Next slide, please, Emmanuel. Just take a quick drink. So, I've done a little bit about why is it important, what it is. So what about some examples of how this impacts us in the workplace? Why continue on, why is it important? Intersectionality at work. Career progression, and I wouldn't just even say career progression, but getting a work can be affected by multiple identity factors. And again, I'll carry on the example of blindness just because that's an experience I have. So in the UK, the stats are that around 75% of blind people, adults of working age who are qualified and able to work, about 75% are unemployed. And I first started working, my first job was with the Royal National Institute of Blind People in the late 90s. The figure they were quoting then was 75% unemployment. I have had 74% unemployment quoted now, but it just shows, there is a huge disparity between blind people not just being at work, but getting work. And it's the same, I don't have the statistics for other groups, but again, autistic people, their experience of getting work, staying in work is different to the non-autistic population. And that's the same across all the different groups. There are issues with representation of women in certain sectors, and women tend to be the ones that do part-time work or casual work because of issues around childcare or caring for others in the family. So career progression can be affected by multiple identities, but it's not just career progression, it's actually getting work in the first place. Psychological safety in the workplace depends on being seen fully. Now, again, I've heard some interesting discussions about this phrase, excuse me, bringing your full self to work. I mean, that's a separate discussion because, perhaps there are part of ourselves we don't want to have at work. But it's all about, do you feel able in your workplace to be free to talk about and be yourself, whatever that means for you in that context? It's about you being free to talk about your partner, your family situation, your living situation, your family background, your culture, whatever it might be. So intersectionality is important at work because it's about, are we understanding that every single one of us has these different aspects to who we are, and that will affect different aspects of how we turn up at work. And again, the world of ADI, there's a lot of discussion around policy. The last session I did was about going beyond policy, and policies are great, but they have to be living, they have to be dynamic, and sometimes policies do overlap complex realities. How many of you have worked for places where you go to the HR handbook and there's a policy on age, policy on gender, policy on sexuality, policy on trans, policy on disability. Now, again, I'm not saying it's all the same. We should merge it all together because there are specific legal aspects and other aspects of certain aspects of minority identities. However, policies need to take account. What we don't want is a situation where, you have to pick and choose which part of your identity, which part of a policy applies to. But I hope you can understand and appreciate that, intersectionality is important and does play out in the workplace. Next slide, please, if you're not there already. I think what intersectionality does show us is the limits of labels. Again, we could have a whole discussion about labels, how useful is a label? Using the context of disability. Excuse me. I know myself and other disabled people often feel, well, how much is this label of disability useful? How much is it just a label? How much should you let a label define you? And you shouldn't, but sometimes labels can be useful in a legal context as well as a social context. But intersectionality shows it's about going beyond those labels. It's about looking at someone as the whole person. And again, it's about being aware that whilst we have our diversity categories, we have reasons why, diversity monitoring needs to have information on, specific characteristics. We do need to take account that people won't fit neatly into boxes. I've been in work situations where it's like, well, where do I fit? Perhaps it's a staff group or some other event. Do I go as a disabled person? Do I go as a trans person? I'm also a woman. I'm also all sorts of different aspects. And so whilst I understand that there is that need for diversity monitoring and data, we have to be careful that we don't just stick to those rigid labels that don't allow for the diversity of lived experience. And again, if we just stick to these rigid labels, then employees may feel unseen, misunderstood. They may not feel like their needs, their situation, their context is being listened to or even acknowledged. just as an aside, that's why I believe we need a variety of role models and, different people in different leadership positions to just show that breadth and depth of diversity of humanity, and that is then represented in the workplace. True inclusion requires acknowledging the whole person experience. And I really couldn't stress that any stronger. All of the research shows, all of the information shows that if you feel like you can go to work and be in work and be your authentic whole self, then, workplaces that create and maintain that culture, that inclusion, they are the ones that are more productive. They are the ones that have better job retention. They are the ones that are more dynamic and creative and just generally better places to be. Okay. So I've talked quite a bit about, why it's important, what it is, why it matters in work. What about getting a bit practical about, in the workplace, how can you design for the real life situation of intersectionality? I've obviously got 4 bullets on here. There will be other things, but for the purposes of this session, I just want to focus on them. Firstly, focus on the whole person, not just labels. I know these might sound simplistic, but after all, we are simply equality. And I think sometimes, whilst equality work is complex and nuanced, I think we just forget some of the basics. And it is about focusing on that whole person experience. As I said earlier, yes, we'll need specific policies in certain aspects. Yes, we'll need sort of, staff networks that cater for different identities. We need places where we can go and be with like-minded people with a like-minded experience. But it is about, as an organization, focusing on that whole person experience. There are many ways you can do that. One of the things I've gotten here is encourage storytelling and lived experience sharing. I think, sharing of that lived experience is so, so powerful. The work of equality, diversity, inclusion can be about data and figures and stats and concepts, but we forget about the humanity behind the headlines. We forget about, the people behind the statistics and the data. So the more we can share stories in our workplaces, in the work we do, from people from different backgrounds, different intersecting identities, the more we can just learn, well, what is it like for somebody who is Black and disabled and gay, or whatever combination of different identities. That's why a lot of the work I do is, yes, it's about policies, procedures, strategy, but it's about sharing my experiences as a blind trans woman, how I navigate the world, acknowledging my areas of privilege as somebody who's white, but also those areas where my intersecting identities impact on me. If my colleague PK was here, they would talk about them being trans, non-binary, Southeast Asian, they're from Malaysia, and they'll be able to talk about their experience. And I think the more we can do to encourage people to share those experiences, to learn from the experiences, and to educate ourselves, the better. Also, ask who might still be overlooked. All of the work we do in ADI, as much as we, want to acknowledge our own privilege and bias, there will still be times when we, either as individuals or organizations, are overlooking certain aspects. And that's where storytelling can be so important. That's where learning from others, that's where, staff networks working together can be so important. So we just make sure that we're not missing any voice. And finally, small daily actions can make a big difference. And that might just be something as simple as, when you ask a colleague what they got up to at the weekend or what they got up to of an evening or whatever, just really listening for how they talk about their experience, how they talk about their family background, how they talk about their relationships, how they talk about their experiences at work. Just that listening. And one of the tools we use here at Simple Equality is compassionate curiosity. Just being curious about other people's experience. If you do that on a daily basis, that really can have an impact. Next slide, please, Emmanuel. Some other things that you can do to sort of, not stop intersectionality, but take that intersectional approach and to, have an impact in the real world of work. Diversify recruitment channels. I know there's a lot of work going on this in some organizations, but it's, if we take an intersectional approach, if we acknowledge that people will come from different areas and aspects and identities, how are you advertising for roles? Obviously, those of you that are in this meeting today, you're engaging with LinkedIn. LinkedIn is great. Lots of people use LinkedIn, but there will be people that don't. So just thinking about, if you want to really be a representative organization, if you want to really employ people from different communities, different aspects, how can you reach out into those communities? How can you diversify your recruitment channels to make sure that you at least give people the chance to know about the work you're doing and to apply for those roles? Mentorship, sponsorship for overlapping identities. It's been my experience in the world of work that there was a lot of work around mentorship for LGBT people, but that didn't always take account of disability and vice versa. I've spent 15, 20 years working in the public sector. Past 6 or so, I was working in a quite major university here in the UK, and there was no specific mentorship program for disabled staff. So it's just thinking about your mentorship programs. Yes, you will need specific ones for specific groups, but how can they take account of overlapping identities? Making sure that perhaps those that are mentors in that program, again, have a variety of different experiences and different backgrounds. Train leaders on multiple identity impacts, or I could say the impact of multiple identities. I think leaders get a hard time. Being a leader is a great privilege, but it's also comes with a lot of responsibility. And I think not enough work is done about helping leaders to really take that broad brush inclusive approach to think, no, well, let's not just focus on one particular area, but let's see that whole person. Let's think about the impact of that whole person and how that will impact their experience at work. Use of language, using inclusive, assumption-free language. And I know there can be a lot of discussion, particularly in the world of trans inclusion and gender identity about, oh, well, are we saying you shouldn't use the word woman or parent? No, we're not saying that, but we're just saying thinking about the language that's used in your policies, your marketing, your internal documents. Is it as inclusive as it needs to be? Or is it unintentionally excluding groups? And the way you do that is by having different groups involved in looking at your policies, your procedures, the language that's used. Yes, it can make things a bit harder because it can take longer. But if you really want to take that intersectional approach, then that is what you need to do. And again, coming back to policies, love policies. Policies are great, but if they're not viewed through an intersectional lens, then they may still have an impact. But again, they could inadvertently exclude more than they include. I have seen something in the chat there, Jude, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, so one more real example. So the challenge, disabled women are underrepresented in promotions in a workplace. I could actually probably say disabled women are underrepresented in certain workplaces, but that's the specific challenge. So let's take that as an example. What could you do to tackle that as a barrier? As I said earlier, mentorship perhaps from other disabled women or disabled people who got to certain positions in the workplace, mentoring people to show, well, how can you be a successful leader? How can you sell yourself? How can you promote yourself? Because, if you come from some of these different minority identity groups, there will be issues around, what society and what the workplace tells you about your worth and your importance and how much you can succeed. And so mentorship can be really powerful. Also, flexible policies. It's been really fascinating to me that, we had the pandemic. I know coronavirus hasn't disappeared completely, but, we had those years of the pandemic and they were horrible. But they showed how good we could adapt, policies around flexible working from home, all sorts of stuff. And there's been a real split I've found in organizations that have quickly wanted to sort of throw all that out and say, right, let's get back to being in the office and flexible working, no more. But those that have kept those flexible policies to take account of different aspects. And particularly if you talk about disabled women, flexible policies can be really beneficial. Inclusion training, obviously I would say that, but having training around what might the barriers be for, in this case, disabled women getting into leadership positions or progressing in their career. So again, those are just some of the things that you could do, and the hope would be that the outcome would be higher retention, engagement, and innovation in an organization. I've made this sound very simple. I know it's not. I know that work has gone on and is still going on in this area, and it's, there are other nuanced challenges, but that's just one example. So coming close to the end of my sort of speaking before we get onto some questions and feedback. So just a bit of reflection for you, just to take literally 20 seconds as I've spoken. Maybe, I've triggered some things in your own experience, either personally on your workplace, but just take some time to think about, based on what I've said, who might be overlooked if you focus on single identities. Who may, you may have had areas where parts of your identity has been overlooked. How has that felt? What impact has that had? Which intersections affect inclusion and engagement? Now, I would say they all do, but I think sometimes in the work we do in EDI, for understandable reasons, certain areas get focused on more than others. As I said, I've spent quite a bit of time working in the public sector, higher education, where there are charters around things like LGBT inclusion, race, and gender. But it's often said that, disability and class and education background and other things get left behind. And again, thinking about what small action can you do as a leader, as a colleague, as an EDI practitioner to make people feel really seen. So just a little point of reflection there to think about that. So I'm going to wrap things up. if you move on to the next slide, Manuel, what are the takeaways I hope you get from this session? Firstly, intersectionality is a lens, not a checklist. If you've been to any of my sessions before, checklists, excuse me, checklists have their place. But we like to look at more things through a lens and a framework, and intersectionality is one of those lenses, because you can't get away from the way different aspects of people will affect their experience in the workplace. Small, thoughtful actions create meaningful inclusion. And I believe that, as EDI practitioners, we want to, break down systemic barriers, bring about lasting change. And that can feel overwhelming and difficult, but really it comes through changes in the individual. That's where you start. Ask yourself, which step can I take this week? So how can you, as an individual, take a step this week to take a more intersectional approach to what you do and how you interact with others? So, last slide. Well, slide 12. Inclusion is ongoing, excuse me, not a one-off task. I know it's a bit of an understatement. Those of you involved in inclusion will know it's an ongoing process, but it's just always worth restating that the real impact comes from seeing people as whole individuals. Commit to noticing, listening, and acting differently. Which idea will you try first? That's just what I'll put in the slides, because you might have had other ideas ping in your mind as I've been talking. So that's me done. Last slide. Thank you very much for your time. So on the slide, you've got just some information on Simply Equality. You've got a logo, which we're quite proud of, because hopefully you can see how that takes the intersectional approach. If you want to get in touch, obviously you've got the email on the website on there, and I believe Emmanuel has put a link in if you want to book a call with me just to explore this further, perhaps look at some of the things I've talked about, like compassionate curiosity. But other than that, thank you very much for joining. I'm going to come off slides on my end and open to any questions or comments. Apologies, Jude, you had it. Let me choose something. Jude, there's a question on reverse mentorships. Do you want to come and speak about that?
That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. And it's just building on what you said about how we're using language, and something like one word can change the whole dynamic of a great idea, such as mentorship. It doesn't really cost anything. It doesn't create a lot of work in terms of matching people or getting people to talk. But once we use the phrase reverse mentoring, it conjures all sorts of different power dynamics. And so I just suggested in there to have something called reciprocal mentoring, because there's a real win-win in that. But it's simple things by just shifting the emphasis of one word, what we can do. So I just wanted to agree with you there. That was my offering.
I mean, language. I know we can tie ourselves up in knots as EDI practitioners, but I think language is so powerful. And I like that it's reciprocal. That's great. Have you had experience of that yourself, Jude?
Yes, I do. I mean, I've worked with lots of different organizations and trained on what's a mentor, what's a coach, and things like that. And putting that in there, it creates a different, it's not like the chief execs having reverse mentoring with someone who's different from them, but lower down the food chain. It's actually about respecting every single person that brings a gift to that table. Absolutely. And it becomes reciprocal, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Yeah.
Love that.
So I've always been fortunate to get, when I've mentored people, I've always gained something anyway as well. So it's not a one-way street. So thank you for suggesting what that mentorship as one of those things we could go forward with. Thank you.
Pleasure. Have we got any other comments, questions, feedback from anybody?
No, we don't.
Okay, no, that's cool. I hope people have found that helpful. I mean, obviously, the aim was that someone coming off mic.
Thank you very much. I was just saying thank you.
No, that's fine then. There will be a recording. I will be doing another one of these sessions. We have a bit of a list of themes we're following, but if people want to suggest other things, you know, by all means, get in touch. Thanks for engaging with me on LinkedIn, and have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
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 Thanks very much. Thank you.
Bye. Stop the recording.